What's up, everybody? It's Izzy, and in today's video I want to weigh in on another somewhat nebulous topic and just kind of give my thoughts on one of the oldest cliches that I remember hearing since basically day one in powerlifting. And if you can read, then you know what this video is about. And it's the saying in powerlifting that you have to find what works for you. Now, this is an absolutely true statement. However, you have to be careful in terms of making it some sort of a panacea, in the sense that, you know, not everybody is a special snowflake, and not every single person is going to have drastically different needs from the next person. It's kind of like anything in life, where the vast majority of people are going to respond best to a common denominator and of style of training, right? And then there's going to be people on the fringes that are either hyper responders to certain things or non-responders to certain things that just need something completely different. So one of the only truths in powerlifting that you can say about almost every lifter is that nobody is exactly the same. And unless there's some really successful powerlifters out there that are identical twins that I don't know about, nobody needs exactly the same thing. And if you look at the top levels of powerlifting, you will find exceptions to pretty much every rule, even though you will find things that are far more common than others. For example, probably 80% plus of the top raw powerlifters are going to be low bar squatters. It might even be higher than that. But there's very notable exceptions. Many super heavyweights squat high bar because they don't have the mobility or shoulder flexibility to get into a low bar position. There's even people in the lighter weight classes that, for whatever reason, are stronger high bar. I mean, Bryce Lubis comes to mind, John Hack comes to mind. On the bench press, as a general rule of thumb, most people will bench more with an arch. However, there's actually people out there for whom arching makes their bench press worse. Who knows why? It's just that, you know, the arching probably puts them in their weakest point in the range of motion without being able to build up some speed heading into it with a flatter back. There's just exceptions to every rule that works for most people. And so this is kind of where that saying comes in, that you need to find what works for you. Now, the only problem I have with this is that even though it's obviously true, too many people take this to mean that you basically just need to randomly try everything to find out what works best for you. When in reality, the basic exercise science principles that dictate proper programming are going to work pretty reliably in the vast majority of cases. So while it is true that every once in a while you'll find somebody who just seems to get better results on their 1 rep max from doing lots of sets of 8 and 10 and 12 and 15, something that you would commonly think of as quote-unquote bad programming because it lacks specificity, yes, there will be snowflakes out there that every once in a while they do really well with it. However, on the whole, 80% of you, 90% of you would get poor results with that approach. So I suppose what I'm saying here is that even though everybody is different, and even though you are going to get these outliers, and you are going to get these people who respond unpredictably to certain things, and these people are guaranteed to exist if you work with a large enough number of people, on the whole, most people respond very predictably to the things that we know tend to work best. And you can think of all these different examples out there that kind of are the exceptions that prove the rule. So for example, you know, a lot of people have moved past linear periodization as the primary way of programming for powerlifting, saying that, you know, advanced lifters simply need something more complex. However, the greatest powerlifter of all time, almost undisputably, is Ed Cohn, and he used linear periodization for his entire career and never stopped making progress until he basically just got injured and couldn't get back to where he was due solely to injuries. On the other hand, for example, in the IPF, we're talking about raw powerlifting, almost nobody uses the conjugate method. Almost nobody at the top uses the conjugate method. However, there are notable exceptions, and there's some people that do, and they get excellent results with it. So there's exceptions to prove every rule. But the point that I'm really making here is that most of you should start out with the things that work well for everybody else, because you're probably not one of the crazy exceptions to the rule. You probably will bench more with an arch. You probably will squat more low bar. You probably will stall out very soon with basic linear periodization. You probably will need more complex periodization. You probably won't do well with ultra variety programming like the conjugate method. You probably won't have your best success with extreme approaches in general, like say maxing out all the time with the Bulgarian method. And more often than not, you're going to find that the middle of the road approach that works for 80% of people really, really well is what works for you. On the other hand, if you do find yourself in a plateau, or if you do find yourself seemingly not responding to things in the same way that most people do, that's where it's appropriate to begin to branch out and quote unquote find what works for you. But as a starting point, that doesn't mean you should try just random crap and the most extreme approaches to things, and that, you know, you shouldn't ever try low bar because you just like high bar better. You're not going to learn to arch on the bench press because you got to find what works for you. It's not basically a get out of free jail card for doing and trying the things that have proven to be effective for the vast majority of powerlifters. And so that's kind of what I'm really getting at here, is that I want you to reconcile two conflicting ideas, two conflicting paradigms. One is that the vast majority of people respond predictably and respond best to the things that works for the vast majority of other people, right? What works for most people will probably work best for you as well. And on the other hand, it is true that there are exceptions. There are people that respond very weirdly, that respond best to just something very different than what the average person responds to. And that if you are not progressing, if you're stalled, maybe you need to consider kind of reaching for one of those more extreme approaches. But it's not until you've seen a lack of progress or that you've plateaued that you can begin to pull out this, well, you got to find what works for you. Like if you know what I mean? Like if you see somebody doing something silly, or you're thinking about doing something silly, like say doing the bamboo bar bench press, or just doing things that are incredibly, that just lack specificity. Okay. Like I've seen people, for example, I've heard of people like say not doing any barbell work for 8 weeks in the off season. That's ridiculous. And while, of course, there are going to be people for whom this works best, because there are exceptions to the rule, perhaps really large lifters who have a tendency to get overuse injuries very easily, for the vast majority of people, we can say that this is not a good approach. So again, my main point here is that while it is true that you do have to find what works best for you, and the vast majority of instances, the conventional wisdom is going to be correct, and you're not going to need to really search very hard to find what works for you, because it's going to be the same basic approach that works for almost everybody else. It's only going to be in these weird instances where you may be an exception in one area, but you're not going to be an exception in every single area. And that's the point that I really want to get across to you guys. So yeah, you're going to find people who are really successful at the top doing things very differently, but for the most part, there will be common themes, and people who try to go against these common themes are generally wrong unless they're known to be one of these exceptions. And not everybody's going to be an exception. That's really all I have to say about that, guys. Hope you have a nice day, and good luck with your training. Peace.